You're listening to the Cycling Podcast Féminin with Orla Chennaoui and Richard Moore. Supported by Rowan King Coaching and Rafa.
Hello, my name's Richard Moore. I'm with Orla Chennaoui.
Hello, Richard.
And this is the third episode of the Cycling Podcast Féminin.
We've survived. Excellent.
Well, have we survived?
My voice hasn't survived very well, but we're physically still here.
So, well, you had your busy weekend working and we were in Paris, weren't we, for the end of the Tour de France and La Course.
Yeah, it was a really busy day in Paris on Sunday. It was fantastic. Sun was shining. Brilliant day of racing. I was there for Sky Sports News. We were doing lives at least every hour, hence the lack of voice now.
We're going to hear interviews in this episode that you've done, Orla, with Marianne Vos and Steve Friebe, a rider's agent, about the issue of TV coverage of women's cycling. Lionel, Birnie has also done an interview with Brian Cookson, the UCI president. We'll hear that. We'll hear an interview with Danny King, who was very disappointed not to make the British team for the Rio Olympic Games. We'll hear about that. She, of course, is a sponsor of the Cycling Podcast through her company, Rowan King Coaching. We'll hear Lionel's retro piece, which I think this month, I've not heard it yet, is about the last Olympic Games. So it'll set up this year's Olympic Games nicely. We'll also hear a long interview from Becky James, the British sprinter who's had a terrible time the last few years with illness, scare, injury, wondering whether she'd ever come back. She's off to Rio. And we'll maybe hear a little bit from Ashley Moolman-Pasio, the South African rider as well. But first of all, you and I caught up in Paris, didn't we, Orla?
We did indeed. Let's go back to Paris.
Here we are on the Champs-Élysées.
Isn't it the most exciting thing?
You look like you've got a bit more energy than I have. Is it the energy balls or something else?
It's 8 hours sleep and learning dance routines in my hotel room. That's what's given me energy, and I'm not lying.
Right, listen, we're watching La Course. It's about half an hour into the race, I think. There's just been a huge crash in front of us.
Yeah, we're trying to see. There's one rider who seems to be requiring further assistance. She's been taken into the medical van. The others have managed to get back on their bikes.
It was a massive pile-up, wasn't it?
Yeah.
We're on the Place de la Concorde, just looking up the Champs-Élysées there. It's quite a spectacle, isn't it?
It's absolutely beautiful. And I was chatting to Danny King earlier. She was saying how this is her first time riding here. And you could see in her eyes there was a sense of an awareness of the occasion of it all. You know, it's just majestic. It's just the most beautiful setting for bike racing. It's wonderful.
Who else did you speak to before the start?
Spoke to Lucy Garner as well, who, this is her second year doing it, so she was loving the sunshine compared to last year, and spoke to Marianne Vos.
Our Pedalers de Charme last month.
Our Pedalers de Charme.
Was she talking about
that? Funny enough, I think she found it a bit overwhelming, so she didn't want to bring it up again on a big day. But I was just chatting to her actually before we started our recorded conversation about getting her mojo back, and she was just saying it's lovely to be back racing, and it's lovely to get that feeling back again. And she did say how it's difficult to not be at the level that she was at, but as I pointed out, her previous level was superhuman anyway, so to be at the level she's at is still a career best for most. But yeah, she definitely looks like she's got her swagger back and looks happy.
And she's one of the few who's going from here to Rio. There aren't many. Pauline Ferrand-Prévot is riding as well, her teammate. But Lizzie Armitstead was a late call-off, wasn't she?
She was a late call-off, although her team say it wasn't late. They say it wasn't last minute. And yet, in the press release that was sent out a few days before the course got underway, they said that she was riding. So they said that there's nothing to worry about. She's simply concentrating on Rio. But she has pulled out of a number of races this year. The National Championships, the Giro Rosa. So, yeah, it seems like she just needs to consolidate her efforts. I guess with a race like this, it's so flat, it's not really going to help her build towards Rio, but she is the world champion. She is wearing the rainbow bands. Would have been lovely to see her here. She said she was disappointed and that she has huge respect for the race, but I guess Rio was just more important at the end of the day.
It is, and that has dictated the quality of the field. A lot of Americans missing in particular. Ashley Moolman-Pasio, I think, was supposed to ride, but I don't think wasn't on the start sheet either.
I didn't see that actually. I was sent a very blurry image of the start sheet, so I've been trying to zoom in on it all day to see exactly who's riding. But Marianne Vos seemed to fancy her chances. Lucy Garner, although this is a sprint, she says she's riding for a teammate, so unless she gets into a breakaway that can stay away, she's not necessarily going for it today. But it's still a world-class field. You know, it's a great stellar cast that we've got here in Paris, and it's a beautiful day for it. This is what kind of a showcase women's cycling needs, and it's got it. It's brilliant.
But does it need more? I mean, this is the final day of the tour. It's several hours before the men arrive. There's a big crowd, but do the women need more? around the Tour de France?
Well, it's interesting because I did speak to Steve Friebe about this, the rider agent.
Danny King's
agent. And we'll hear from him. But he was saying that La Course gets it right. And what they do here is great. And I have to say, I mentioned to him as well that when I have been tweeting from the race this morning, and I'm tweeting about the Tour de France and the women's race, and almost every Twitter response I got was about the women's race. Everyone is actually excited about it, and I think the fact that it's not the broadcasters being here is important, but journalistic presence here is important because it means we're tweeting about the race. It means we're putting pictures on Instagram about the race. It's raising that online awareness of who the riders are, what's happening. And so even if you don't get to watch the race on television, you'll still know that it took place. You'll still know who won. And I think it's a good thing.
Well, there's a break there that's formed includes Hannah Barnes, the British national champion.
And shamefully, I didn't tweet that she was riding.
I noticed, Orla, that you tweeted the British riders and missed out the national champion.
Well, I didn't actually...
Friend of the podcast, no less.
I know. I didn't actually say these are the British riders who are riding. I was tweeting in response to someone who said Lizzie had pulled out. What are the other British riders who were here? I just happened to see Lucy Garner and Danny King at the time, so they were present in my mind. And I'm a busy lady.
I'm just going to go and get you a spade.
So I'm here at the bottom of the Champs-Élysées at Place de la Concorde with Marianne Vos before getting underway at La Course. Marianne, when we talk about exposure for women's racing and how much it's needed, I guess, what's your opinion on having a race that precedes the men's race when the cameras are all here, the media's all here? Is that a good thing for women's racing, or do you think it should be something separate?
Well, of course, this is one of the most iconic places in cycling here on the Champs-Élysées, and to have a combined event on the last day of Le Tour, that's big. And for us, we get this attention, and of course, we want to make a good race. So it's good. But as the Le Tour is 3 weeks and we race only one day, you can't really compare.
Is there any happy solution to getting more media coverage, do you think, to women's racing in terms of building up a race on its own, as we have with the women's tour, or joining in a little bit more with the men's race?
I see it works both ways, and here we have a new. Well, of course, everybody is excited about cycling, but you have some fans that are normally not into women's cycling, and you involve them more in the women's part. And with the women's tour, we get our own podium, and you see that attracts also a lot of fans. So it's going both ways, and I see women's cycling is growing.
And it's funny that you say that, because while I've been here, I've been tweeting about the men's race and about the women's race, and every response I've had, bar none, has been about the women's race. That seems to be what's getting people excited today. I mean, are you aware of that growing excitement around women's cycling? I know it's been growing for quite a while now, but is it reaching new levels, you think?
Well, yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's getting big, and I get a lot of positive reactions on our racing. It's not always easy to follow, and some races, you have to get really online to see something of the races. But we have some good fans and some good crowds, and it's growing.
So it's a beautiful day in Paris. The sun's shining, just a few fluffy clouds overhead. We can see the Eiffel Tower. We're at the Place de la Concorde, looking up the Champs-Élysées. Couldn't be more beautiful. What a setting for a race. What a setting for cameras as well. Steve Friebe, the rider agent, is with me just now. Steve, is it a good thing that we have women's racing and men's racing at the same time? The cameras are all here, the journalists are all here. Is that a happy solution for you, do you think?
It can be, is probably the real answer, because it can be a double-edged sword. And we see that at some races where it can be a negative. So take the Tour of Flanders, maybe, as an example, where all the infrastructure is there. The women are riding on a very similar course to the men. Obviously, the crowds are there, which is fantastic. But in terms of the actual amount of TV coverage they then get, it's really, really minimal. I mean, we're lucky if the host broadcaster broadcaster will even cut to the finish of the women's race live during the men's race. So I'm not a fan of that if that's the way it's going to work, because the paradigm shift we have to make within women's cycling at the moment is about TV coverage. Unless we're getting lots and lots of eyeballs onto this fantastic sport, then we're not going to be able to bring more sponsors into the sport, therefore be able to pay more riders, which just brings the whole level up of everybody, and then you create this really lovely virtuous circle within what is a fantastic sport of women's cycling. La Course at the Tour de France get it dead right, because they commit to live TV coverage, and that gets broadcast all around the world. So they use their ASO, the organizer of the Tour de France, they use their sort of media muscle to make sure that it gets taken by broadcasters all over the world. So this race probably gets the biggest worldwide audience. So, and obviously we have all the infrastructure here for the men's race that will happen later. There are literally hundreds of thousands of people out watching on the street. So it creates a fantastic platform and showcase for the sport.
It is seen as a bit chicken and egg with regards, as you term it, eyeballs on the sport and sponsors. Others have suggested that we need the sponsors on board first, that we need all men's teams to commit to women's teams. You think it's the other way around? Do you think we need the coverage first and then the teams will come? Absolutely,
because I think if you just say for example the UCI just said, right, every single World Tour men's team has to have a women's team, all you create are lots of teams for nobody to see. And is there actually enough riders currently to be able to go around to fill those teams? And I would argue that there isn't. In fact, I know that there isn't. So I don't want to see a situation where we force sponsors into a sport. What I want to see is the UCI actually using their muscle to actually say, we will guarantee that this sport gets broadcast. And I think one of the misconceptions that people have is that broadcast is about people like, certainly in Britain, the BBC and Sky Sports, but it's not about broadcasters investing. It's about race organisers and the UCI investing into making sure their sport is broadcast, and then taking it to Eurosport, Sky Sports and the BBC and saying, please broadcast this. And actually, from the discussions I've had with broadcasters, I actually know they want the content. It's just currently it's just not available, because to be fair to the race organisers, it's not cheap to put on a professional bike race, and it's certainly not cheap to provide live broadcast for a bike race because of the helicopters and transmission planes and everything else that goes on around it. So I understand the race organisers' dilemma, but the UCI should help. Why not? Why can't the UCI subsidise the key race organisers to make sure that this sport is broadcast live as in effect an investment to help grow the sport? Because, as I said earlier, that creates the eyeballs, then the sponsors will come, and then we just create a lovely virtuous circle within this sport.
The UCI president, Brian Cookson, was also in Paris, and after watching the Australian rider Chloe Hosking win La Course, Lionel Birnie caught up with him.
Brian, we're here on the Champs-Élysées in Paris at the end of the 12th round of the inaugural Women's World Tour. 5 rounds to go. What's your assessment of the series so far, and what changes do you think, improvements it's made on the old World Cup?
Well, I think there's a lot of improvements on the old World Cup. We're seeing stage races as well as circuit races and place-to-place races. We're also seeing a massive growth in enthusiasm from teams, from sponsors, from riders, from organisers as well. And, the media coverage has been exceptional this year. Still some way to go to match the men's scene, of course. But a big step forward this year, I believe, and lots more interest coming forward now for next year as well.
Can you let us in on anything that might be happening next year? Any steps forward?
Well, I can tell you that I've already had conversations with people like the organisers of the Amstel Gold Race, and they want to put on a women's race as part of the Women's World Tour as well. That kind of level of interest is coming through all of the time now. We're seeing a real sea change in the support for women's cycling, and that's a great thing, and we're going to try and do what we can to support that.
Where do you think we'll be in 5 years' time? What will the World Tour look like in 2021?
That's a good question. Let's see. I'm anxious that we have sustainable development and growth rather than just a kind of big bang and then it all fizzles out. So I'm hoping that we'll have incremental growth over the next few years. I think we'll see some more stage races. I don't think we'll ever see a kind of 3-week Tour de France, but I'm hopeful that we will see some stage races coming into the World Tour programme. Doesn't necessarily have to be in France, Italy or Spain. It could be in other parts of the world. There's a lot of interest all around the world now, and we want to do what we can to help that come through.
I know the Women's Tour is keen to extend to 7 days. Is that something going to happen? I believe they came up against a little bit of opposition to expanding the race.
Well, I think we've got to be careful that we don't overheat things in any one given part of the world or any one event. So let's try and put together a balanced programme. Let's try and grow, as I say, incrementally and sustainably, and I think that's the right way forward.
And lastly, TV is the key to all of this, isn't it? Because without TV, there's less interest from sponsors to invest in the sport. What is the UCI doing to be proactive when it comes to talking to broadcasters?
Well, we've invested ourselves quite a lot in making sure that there is television coverage, either, if we can, as much as possible live. If not live, then recorded highlights and so on. And we're in that kind of developmental phase at the moment. We are talking to broadcasters, we are talking to race organisers, and I think, we've already seen this year a lot more television coverage of women's cycling, and that can only grow as far as I'm concerned.
The Cycling Podcast Féminin. Interviews, insight and analysis of women's racing. Supported by Rowan King Coaching and Rafa. See rowanking.com for tailored training programmes by Luke Rowe and Danny King.
So we heard there from Marianne Vos, Steve Fry, the writer's agent, and Brian Cookson. And if we're interrupted here, we've got another guest presenter this month, Eve Chennaoui.
I know, unfortunately, she always likes to get in on the action, like her mama. So if you hear any screeching in the background, I'm afraid that's just my daughter joining in the fun.
Well, the course was a great occasion, wasn't it? It's a very majestic setting, Paris. And as we discussed in our little chat in Paris, I'm not sure if it is essentially a criterium, which Lionel put to Brian Cookson, wondering whether that was a sort of suitable. It's a suitable event to be part of the Women's World Tour. It's the only bit of the Tour de France cake that the women get. And Cookson said, that it's a case of making small steps.
Yeah, and it's a really difficult one because we do need to be making steps. And I do keep saying that if we look to the recent past and just how far women's cycling has come on, we are in a privileged position to be at the stage now where we've got a women's World Tour, and we do have La Course. But it's hard because it was my first time really getting to watch La Course, to be honest, and I really enjoyed the action. I really enjoyed the racing. It's fast paced, it's very attacking, as women's cycling tends to be. We had lots of crashes because of that. Smaller teams, more difficult to control. But it did feel very much like a warm-up to the men's race, I have to say. The podium celebration after the race was over felt very low-key, I thought. I'm not sure if there's a way around that, but it almost felt like a sort of a makeshift podium at the bottom of the Champs-Élysées on Place de la Concorde, and almost like a let's pretend that we're in Paris. Is that fair? I don't know. Or let's pretend that it's a big event. That said, speaking to the riders, they were all delighted to be racing on the biggest stage that the world has to offer when it comes to cycling, the Champs-Élysées, and delighted to have the extra coverage. And I think that one of the things we've been talking about as well is television coverage for these kinds of races and how important they are. And Steve Fry had mentioned having eyeballs on the race and having the cameras there to film it from start to finish. And that is one important aspect of promoting women's cycling. But also, you've got hundreds of journalists there. And whether all of them are covering La Course or not, or as interested in La Course or not as they are the men's race, they're still there talking about it and they're adding to that general chatter. And these days, that really matters when it comes to any kind of sporting coverage. It's as much about what esteemed figures are tweeting from a race, what pictures they're putting up from a race. It's about building excitement and conversation around the sporting action as well as watching the sport, because let's face it, who has time to sit down and watch a bike race from start to finish, be it men's or women's? So I think the fact there were so many of us there, and hopefully a lot of us talking about the women's race, does add to it to an extent. And yeah, it's a small step, but that's what it takes, surely.
Tour organisers don't make it that easy for the media to get there. The race starts at 1:30 on a Sunday. The previous evening, if you're covering the Tour de France, the stage finished in Morzine in the Alps, a 6 or 7 hour drive away. Journalists were lucky to get away from there at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the evening. Do the maths. It's a long haul from there, from the Alps, up to get to Paris for 1 o'clock to cover the race. So that's partly why there were so few journalists there. it's tough, and you wonder why it's not a bit later. Anyway, I mentioned earlier that I also spoke to Danny King on the Champs-Élysées after the race, not just about La Course, which her teammate Chloe Hosking, of course, won, and we played an interview with Chloe Hosking about her win in our final regular episode from the Tour de France. So Chloe Hosking won for Wiggle High Five. Danny King was obviously delighted about that, but she came to the team camper van a bit bloodied and bruised, and she's a bit bruised anyway, having not made the British team for the Olympic Games. So here is Danny King. Today, a great win for the team, but a bit of a disappointing race for you. You've come in quite bloodied.
Yeah, I crashed with just over a lap to go, so until that point it was alright. Fast and furious race. Yeah, I was just on it from the start. But yeah, brilliant result for the team, obviously, of Chloe winning. There
were a lot of crashes today. What do you put that down to?
I think obviously because most of the races on cobbles, it throws the bike around a bit, and I think just touches of wheels were the main thing. And obviously when there's a pile up in front of you and you've got girls everywhere, then there's nowhere to go. That's exactly what happened to me. There was kind of a crash in front of me, girls either side of me, so I had kind of no choice but to hold my breath and hope that I didn't had a soft landing.
But Chloe obviously was able to do it in the end without a lot of her teammates there.
Yeah, I think we were all active at the start. Amy was in a break. We were all trying to follow moves, but essentially she did it on her own at the finish, which is something she's very experienced at. Obviously she is a sprinter and it's what she does best. So she did a really good job.
So Danny, we're speaking before the Olympic Games. Obviously a huge disappointment for you. Was it a surprise when the team was announced and you weren't part of it?
Oh yeah, definitely. Obviously, like I've said in the media previously, I had a criteria that I was given, and in my opinion I ticked every box and should have been going. So it was a surprise, unfortunately.
So there wasn't an appeal, wasn't there, and that was unsuccessful. Were you satisfied with the process for that, or not really?
No, not really, because they basically came back and said they felt that they followed the criteria, which if you look at it, is wrong. But I didn't really have any I couldn't do
nowhere else to go with that, really.
No, basically not. No, there's nothing I could have done.
And so how do you, because your efforts have been focused on that for a long time. You obviously were in London as well. I mean, how difficult it is to pick yourself up after a disappointment like that?
It's obviously really hard, but luckily I've got a lot of amazing people around me, friends and family, and I think that's been the reason that I can move on and kind of get over it. Thankfully I've got a lot more in my life than just cycling, so you have to just look at the positives, and I'm still making massive progress as a cyclist, so I'm still enjoying it. So just look on to the next goal. Obviously I was gutted and it is disappointing, don't get me wrong, but there's only so long you can be disappointed for.
Are you thinking also, as a road cyclist, I presume you've still got a lot of improvement to come. Are you thinking 4 years hence and another go at the Olympic Games?
I think it's too early to say about for the next Olympics, but for sure the Commonwealth Games will be a target for me. I'd like to ride the Worlds in Qatar purely for experience. Obviously I've never ridden a World Championship before, and I think then next year in Norway that could be a course that potentially suits me a bit better. So just looking for...
So there are targets on the horizon.
Yeah.
I'm amazed you've never ridden the World Championships before.
No, never.
It's incredible. Danny, we've been very lucky with the first three Cycling Podcast Féminin to be sponsored by Rowan King Coaching. Tell us how the company came about.
We've always been really obviously passionate about cycling. Matt, my fiance, has come from a cycling family. His dad's coached me pre-London and before I got on the programme, and he's now coaching me again. And basically it was a chance to kind of come up with a new idea where current professionals were involved in the coaching process. I think there's a lot of ex-professionals and sports scientists out there that coach, but no one in the current sort of scene, using the current methods that are always coming out. So it's got a USP of having mine and Luke's current training experience to reuse.
Are you and Luke quite aligned in I presume, so you were coached by Luke's father, and so presumably you and he are quite similar in terms of your philosophy around coaching, are you?
Yeah, I've been in part of their family now for nearly 8 years, and we've been doing similar things, and we're actually quite similar riders if you look at us too. So we've got a lot of experience. Courtney's come from, he's coached Olympic champions, world champions of all different disciplines. So he's got so much experience, and Matt himself's been European champion, ridden for professional teams on the road. But not only that, you know, we coach people who just want to get around a sportif, not just people that are striving to be Olympic and world champion. We cater for everyone and provide unique programs depending on what goal someone has.
And I guess how much time they have as well, because you're coaching people who are juggling work and other things as well.
Yeah, and that's also what we sort of pride ourselves on, making the best of the time that people have to train. You know, I think one of our shortest sessions is 12 minutes on the turbo.
Sounds perfect.
Exactly, yeah, and we've seen amazing results from all of our clients. So it's really exciting, I think, where that can go as well.
Is that something you enjoy, though, that kind of contact?
Yeah, I do. It's really nice, actually, to see that, you know, everyone, whatever their goal is, you know, works just as hard.
The Cycling Podcast Féminin, interviews, insight and analysis of women's racing, supported by Rowan King Coaching and Rafa. See rowanking.com for tailored training programs by Luke Rowe and Danny King.
Thank you very much to Rowe and King Cycling Coaching for sponsoring the Cycling Podcast Féminin. You heard from Danny King there before the break, and thanks also to Rafa for becoming sponsors of the Cycling Podcast and the Cycling Podcast Féminin. Very grateful to them. So we're going to look ahead to the Olympic Games now, coming up in Rio. And we first of all hear from Lionel Birnie with his monthly retro spot. He's gone a bit less retro this month.
It's a bit modern for retro, isn't it? But I like it.
Modern retro. Because he's very enthusiastic about this, Lionel. He's got this so much. There was a great article that was published by Helen Pidd in The Guardian during the Tour de France about the club that Adam and Simon Yates were members of, and it was set up by suffragettes in Bury. So that's the kind of thing that Lionel will be exploring, I'm sure, in future episodes. But in the meantime, here is Lionel speaking about the London Olympics in 2012.
With the Rio Olympics just a few days away, I thought we'd look back 4 years to London 2012 and the women's road and track events. The road race was held on a rainy Sunday, and because of the conditions there were several punctures at costly times. A number of attacks on the first descent of Box Hill, particularly by the Dutch rider Ellen van Dijk and Britain's Emma Pooley, softened up the bunch. Marianne Vos attacked the final time up Box Hill, but it was not until after the descent that she got clear with Lizzie Armitstead, Russia's Olga Zabelinskaya and Shelley Olds of the USA. They quickly got a gap, and when Olds punctured, the other three knew they had the medals in the bag. With 2 kilometres to go, Zabelinskaya tried to get clear, but she was caught, and so the three came into the mile together. Dutchwoman Vos opened her sprint with 200 metres left and held off Armitstead to win gold, adding it to the points race title she'd won on the track in 2008. America's Kristin Armstrong retained the Olympic time trial title that she'd won in Beijing 4 years earlier. The 38-year-old was 15 seconds clear of Germany's Judith Arndt, with Zabelinskaya adding a second bronze medal following the road race. But Zabelinskaya won't be in Rio. In 2014 she was banned for 18 months after testing positive for a banned hormone. Last week the UCI announced Russia had withdrawn 3 riders from the Rio Games because they'd previously served doping suspensions, and it's believed Zabelinskaya is one of them. After the road events, the focus shifted to the action inside the velodrome, or the Pringle as it was nicknamed because of the distinctive roof design. On the opening day there was drama in the team sprint. Great Britain's Victoria Pendleton and Jess Varnish qualified second fastest and then appeared to have beaten Ukraine with a time good enough to put them into the gold medal final. But they were disqualified for an early changeover. There was another early change in the final, which gave Germany's Christina Vogel and Miriam Welter the title ahead of the Chinese. Pendleton bounced back the following day to win the Keirin, cruising through to the final and winning her second Olympic gold. On the last day of the track, Pendleton ended her glittering career with an Olympic sprint final against her great rival Anna Meares of Australia. In a bruising first race, Pendleton got over the line first, but she was relegated, and that gave her a mountain to climb. It seemed to knock the stuffing out of her, and Meares took the second race to win the coveted sprint title. Pendleton's now retired, of course. She competed as a jockey at the Cheltenham Festival earlier this year, but Meares is still racing. Now 32, she's set to compete in her 4th Olympics and will carry the Australian flag at the opening ceremony in Rio this week. In the 2 endurance events, Britain's Laura Trott was the star of the show, winning a thrilling Omnium competition ahead of America's Sarah Hammer and Australia's Annette Edmondson. The team pursuit, which then consisted of 3 riders racing over 3 kilometres, Laura Trott, Danny King and Joe Rousel broke the Olympic and world record in qualifying, the first round and the final as they beat the United States. It'll be interesting to see how they go now that the format for the games has changed. It will be 4 riders over 4 kilometres in Rio.
You are listening to the Cycling Podcast Féminin, supported by Rowan King Coaching and Rapha. Rapha, celebrating the sport and producing the finest cycling clothing since 2004. Go to rapha.cc for more information.
At the 2013 World Track Championships in Minsk, Becky James won 4 medals, 2 golds in the sprint and keirin and 2 bronzes in the team sprint and 500 metre time trial. She was just 21. Victoria Pendleton had retired and James looked to be her successor. She has had a tough time since. In 2014, she suffered a mysterious knee injury, but far worse followed when a routine cervical smear test revealed abnormal precancerous cells. She had surgery and was given the all clear, but the knee injury persisted. It has been a difficult road back, and for 2 years it was unclear whether she would even get back to the top. But in February, at the World Championships in London, Becky proved she could by winning a bronze medal in the keirin. A short time after the World Championships, I went to the National Cycling Centre in Manchester to visit Becky, and I started by asking her whether that bronze medal felt like a gold.
100% felt like a victory to me. Even though it was a bronze medal, you know, I'm never usually that satisfied when I'm not winning gold, but to me it felt like I won gold just to sort of get back on the podium. This time last year, I would never have seen myself back at a World Championships, and I honestly didn't believe in myself that I could make it back. So to even just go there and to ride in front of a home crowd was amazing, and I went in there with like no expectations, and to come away with a medal, a bronze medal, and I'll take that because it was...
You say no expectations, but really, I mean, what in your head would have been a positive performance or result there?
Well, obviously I want to go into a race and win a medal, but I really didn't know what to expect because I'd sort of had a disappointing World Cup in Hong Kong, which was only 4 weeks before. And then again in New Zealand, I did a 200 and I was knocked out first round, so I kind of didn't really know where I was at, and I hadn't done any other racing since national champs. So for me, to sort of step up and just get in the mix with all the other female in other nations was like a huge step for me, and I really didn't know where I was going to be. But from Hong Kong, I sort of changed my attitude and turned myself around, and every week I just saw really, really good progression, whereas through the winter I didn't really see any fast, rapid progression. It was just really slow progress, and then within the 4 or 5 weeks from Hong Kong, I just started making big steps, and sort of I think that gave me a little bit of confidence going in, knowing that I did have a bit of form.
Let's go all the way back to 2013. You know, Victoria Pendleton's retired. There's a vacancy there, and you stepped up and obviously had that incredible performance in Minsk at the World Championships, and it looked then as though you were the sort of replacement for Victoria Pendleton. I'm sure you don't like that comparison, but you know, what did you feel then achieving as much as you did there and looking ahead the next 3 years towards Rio? What were can you remember what you felt at that point?
For me, like missing out on London at the time, it was like the worst thing ever. I was obviously devastated, but I just wasn't in very good shape, and obviously Vicky P was the main person who was going to be going, and then obviously with what happened at Worlds and winning the medals I did, it was the best thing that I'd ever done was to miss London, just because I sort of really knuckled down through the summer. I had a really good winter of World Cups, and I just had really consistent training, and I could just see like progress week in, week out for like probably 3 months. I was just getting faster and faster and faster, and again, I kind of felt like what I did in London, I knew I'd done everything I possibly could. If there were people faster than me, then I knew I couldn't have trained any harder, and something would have to change when I got back. And I went into it and just enjoyed myself, and I knew I could just get the best from my form when I'm enjoying myself. And then after Worlds, I kind of just enjoyed myself for a while and kept myself fit, but kind of just took like a half easy year. And then after I got 2 bronzes at Worlds in 2014, I knew I really wanted to knuckle down, ready for Commonwealths and 2-year mark out from Rio. And sort of I think I wanted to train so hard and I wanted everything so much. That's when my injury came. And yeah, it was just a long time out after that.
Do you remember the first twinge or the first moment you felt there was something wrong with your knee?
Yeah, we were in Mallorca on a training camp, and we just ridden up Sacalobra, which is like a 12-kilometre climb, and I didn't feel it once riding up there, and I got down the other side and we all stopped for a drink, and it was that moment I started pedalling again after that, and that was my first twinge in my knee, and it was like an hour and a 20-minute ride home, and I was sort of riding with pain the whole way home, and sort of from that day on I struggled for a long time, a good year with pain. I sort of had an easy day, and then I thought it was going to be okay, and then we did another fairly big ride, and then that's when I realised I was really in pain, and I came back and had 3 weeks of rehab here in Manchester, and they said it would take 3 weeks to go, and then that was all fine, and I had a really good week of training on the 4th week, and then the 5th week I was having to have a week off because that's when I went in for my minor surgery with my smear, like my pre-cancerous cells, and then I had a week at home, and then I went on a road ride with my mum, just really easy to sort of gradually build back up into it, and then that first ride back, I had pain in my knee again, and it'd been 2 weeks pain-free, but whether something in that week off and then stepping back on, and it wasn't right, and then pretty much, so that must have been end of April, early May, and then from then on I was trying to push through. It'd be days on, days off, and I could never double up on a training session, and some sessions it'd be really painful, some sessions I'd get through, and we pushed through, and then I went racing in Germany in the summer, and I knew it was going to be bad when I stepped up in Cottbus, and it's one of my favourite tracks. It's an outdoor 333 track, and I had to do a flying 200, and I did 11.9 seconds, which for me on that track is so slow, and I knew that what I was doing just wasn't going to work. It wasn't going to make me the best I could be. I couldn't possibly just carry on doing one session a day to make me the best rider I could be by Rio. So that was when we sort of pulled it. We knew I needed to do some rehab, so I pulled out of the Commonwealth Games, and then we did some rehab here in Manchester until September, and then it still wasn't right. And then that's when we made the decision to go to the intensive rehab unit in Bisham.
You mentioned the cancer scare just almost in passing there, but that must have put the knee injury in perspective, did it?
Yeah, 100%. Like one of my friends said to me, would you rather good health or good form? And obviously rather good health over anything. And yeah, I guess I've put it behind me now, and thankfully everything's all good, but at the time it was a really stressful thing that I was going through, and it was just before the Mallorca camp, so whether anything to do with stress and my injury had come along that way, I'm not really sure, but it was kind of like an 8-week block where you're waiting for results, and then you're waiting for surgery and stuff, and I just found that the most stressful 8 weeks, and I thought like going away to Mallorca would like sort of take my mind off it, but you constantly think about it day in, day out until you have the results when it's all clear and everything's going to be fine.
It must have been very scary though.
Yeah, and it was really scary, and I'm a terrible person for Googling stuff. I know you should never look on the internet and self-diagnose yourself, but you can convince yourself of all awful things, and I will never do that again. So yeah, it was a horrible time for me, but sort of put it behind me now, knowing I'm healthy and good to go.
And in terms of the knee injury, I mean, there must have been moments. You mentioned that that 3 months building up to Minsk, you'd been sort of surfing this wave almost of constant improvement, and the encouragement you would gain from that. How mentally difficult was it to suddenly sort of crash back down and just be struggling to perform in training at all?
It was really tough for me. Just for me, I know what works for me is consistency, hard work, just the sort of basic training, the track, the gym and the road. And if I get all that working together, then I know that I can be the best I can be. And I think the hardest thing I found was not riding my bike for 4.5 months. And like when I don't exercise, I'm really, really moody, so it doesn't help. And like I'm not a very nice person to be around when I'm not exercising. And it's just I've never had a serious injury before, so I wasn't used to not doing exercise, or I was doing rehab and stuff, but it's just not the same as what you do every day. And what I found hardest was from April last year when I came back to Manchester, even through till December, January, just being completely off the pace and just not knowing if I was going to make it back, I found that really, really hard, and just being so slow and seeing just such slow progress compared to where I've ever been before. I just felt like I had to start all over again.
An important aspect to Becky James' story is her large family. She has 3 sisters and a brother who have all been cyclists, and another younger sister, Bethan, who is severely disabled and needs 24-hour care. Helping to look after Bethan has always been a big part of Becky and her brother and sister's lives. Becky has said in the past that her sister's condition, she was born with fluid on the brain, she is blind and suffers from severe epilepsy and cerebral palsy, has helped her keep a sense of perspective. I wondered though, as she struggled with her knee injury and her health scare, whether she found this a real challenge. As she said, she thought she wasn't a nice person to be around when she couldn't train.
I think going home to my parents probably once a month really helped me, because I was sort of travelling back and forth from Bisham to Wales to Northampton, and I was doing a lot of travelling around, and I was really tired. But my parents and my boyfriend, just my mum especially, more than anything, always put everything into perspective, and she was like, you're healthy in your body, like she always refers to my sister Beth, and I'm lucky to be doing what I do, and that 100% puts everything into perspective. But then it's hard to put it in to your everyday life just because it's what you know, but they always put it into perspective for me. And there was days when I'd leave the velodrome, I'd leave rehab, and I would just be crying my eyes out. I would be just so emotional, and the amount of times I felt like that, I just wondered how much longer I could keep on going on for, because I was just so emotional all the time, and I just felt dreadful. And I wouldn't just cry, I'd hysterically cry where I just couldn't even talk, and I just didn't want anyone to say anything. I just wanted to cry and let it all out, and it was really, really tough time for me. It makes me sad because the amount of times that I left the velodrome as well when I was in pain with my knee, and I felt like kind of no one believed me, because it was never really a diagnosis to start, and I wondered if it was actually all in my head and that there was nothing wrong with me, and then I just thought, but I could never imagine myself doing anything different to what I do now. So I also found that really hard, knowing that I felt like I had no other options.
Becky's boyfriend is George North, the Welsh rugby star, and I wondered about how that worked, given that top sports people often say that they couldn't do what they do, make the sacrifices, and, let's face it, be pretty selfish without a supportive partner.
Somehow we've sort of just got that balance. Last year was obviously really tough on both of us. It was just a rubbish year for me, and not a great year for George with concussions and having so much time off. But I think from the good times, we just bounce off each other. So far this year, I've been really happy. Sort of from January on, when I've just changed my mindset, changed my attitude, and we've just kind of been bouncing off each other because everything's going so well. And I've just got to keep this mindset now and remember how all the good times feel, and just keep on feeling this way. And I think from being injured last year, it just gives you a whole new perspective on your career and how much it actually means to me. But it's it's not life or death. It's not going to kill me if I don't make it to be a world champion ever again, or if I do, it's not going to kill me. So I've kind of just got that perspective on it now. But yeah, we've never known anything different. We've both been athletes from when we first started dating, so we've just been used to that from the beginning, and we bounce off each other on all the good times.
I was speaking to Becky shortly before a scandal engulfed British cycling, with the man in charge, Shane Sutton, accused of sexism, discrimination and bullying. There's an ongoing investigation into Sutton's conduct and the culture of British cycling, but Becky has nothing but praise for him. I'd heard that Shane had challenged her on one occasion when she was struggling to come back from her knee injury, asking her how much she really wanted success. I asked her whether she remembered that conversation.
Yeah, I remember that, and I think it was when I bought my dog as well, and he just said, do you really want this? Are you committed to it? You could leave at any time. You don't have to do this. And I knew there and then I wanted to do it. I think it was June last year, and I was I didn't really know which direction I was going with my injury, but I knew deep down I want to get to the Olympics. It's the one thing I've never done, and that's the one thing I really want to achieve, is to go to the Olympics.
And Shane has clearly been somebody very important. He's believed in you and supported you. How big a factor has he been in you getting back to this place?
Oh, huge. He's been the one person that's believed in me all this time. And I think if it wasn't for him, because I know he's always completely straight, he'll never lie to you, and the fact that he said he believed in me all this time, that's one thing that kept me going, and I never wanted to let him down either. And I can't even thank him enough for supporting me the whole way through. I think even the coaches and a lot of other people in British cycling sort of lost hope in me. And obviously everyone wanted me to do well, but I don't think anyone believed I could get back. But he was that one person that kept me going and always believed that I'd get back. I think from getting my bronze at Worlds, just seeing the reaction that the whole team had, I think everyone was just so happy, and we won it as a team. It wasn't just me, because Phil, Bert, the physio, Hannah, our massage rehab specialist, they worked so much with me over the last 2 years. The psychologist, just the coaches, just everyone. I felt like we won it as a team. I'd never been through anything like that before, and I could enjoy it with everybody, not just myself.
So are you completely pain-free, injury-free now?
Yeah, pain-free, injury-free, and it's going to stay that way.
Shane thinks you can win gold in Rio.
Oh, yeah, it's good to hear that. I'm just knuckling down, I've been knuckling down since Hong Kong. Like I said, my attitude's changed, and I'm just so determined, and I want it so much. I'm excited to just sort of see where I can get to.
So that was Becky James, always interesting Becky James, who's had an amazing journey the last few years. 2013 it looked like she was going to just replace Victoria Pendleton as the queen of the track. Sorry about that. But she looked like she was...
Cliché alert.
Well, in fact, it took Victoria Pendleton a lot longer to win a gold medal in a major championships than it took Becky James, and it looked after 2013 like she was going to become the dominant female sprinter. It hasn't quite worked out like that, but hopefully she's on the way back. And really interesting interview. She's a very interesting person, and I think that it's a tough one, because she also has this sort of other life as the partner of a rugby player, George North, who's a major figure in Welsh sport, certainly in British sport, and in some ways it must make it a bit tougher, especially when things were very hard for her, with the health scare and injuries and so on, and especially the injury that she had was undiagnosed and it wasn't really clear what it was, so there was a sort of mystery around it. Very tough. And and she mentioned Shane Sutton in there, the controversial Shane Sutton, who's now left British cycling, of course.
A man whose name shall not be spoken.
Well, it will by Becky James, because she clearly feels that she owes him a lot. And he told us a while ago that, he basically took her down to the track one day and said, look, Becky, I know you want it, but do you need it? And it came down to that. And, I suppose there was that question whether she actually needed to carry on with this career that was spluttering, and she did. She decided she did need it, and she's gone about it in a very impressive way, and it looks like she's back to full health.
I think that's as well why she had such respect from Shane Sutton. I remember chatting to him at the World Track Championships in London earlier this year, and he could not have been happier that she was back and on track for Rio, and the fact that she's worked so hard. And he said to me as well, she doesn't need this. She doesn't need to be doing it. So the fact that she has got back to the level that she's at, I think won over a lot of admiration from him. And whatever has been said, whatever will be said about Shane Sutton's role in women's cycling in particular, she will, I think anything that she does in Rio will be to the credit of Shane Sutton, because he 100% had her back, and whatever other female cyclists have said, I know that their relationship was very strong indeed.
Well, you're off to Rio, Orla, with that voice of yours. I hope it recovers in time for the games.
I hope I find it along the way somewhere. Yes, I'm off to Rio for 4 weeks, actually. So I'll be there just before, all throughout it, and a little bit afterwards. So I cannot wait.
Well, the first event, the road events come first, don't they, before the track events. Let's hear a little bit from Ashleigh Moolman-Pasio, the South African rider, a real climbing specialist who Hannah Troop spoke to at the women's tour. And she must be a favourite for Rio, which is on such a mountainous course. Here is Ashleigh Moolman-Pasio.
Yeah, so Rio is a big target for me. I've just come from Rio, seeing the course. I really love it. Also a really cool city with really good energy. So I was feeling really motivated coming into this tour. I've actually also just come from a tour in Germany. So it's been a tough 10 days of hard racing. I won in Germany, which was great for the confidence. And then coming here, it was also just again using as preparation for Rio, sort of experimenting with some different tactics. So I was quite aggressive. And yeah, I'm feeling really good, feeling confident moving forward, and now I can go home to do some good training and then another tour in Germany before Rio.
Your tactics of being able to go onto the off-road and then come back on were quite incredible the other day. What happened there?
Wow. Well, in the breakaway, our wheels were overlapped, and Elisa sort of made a sudden movement, so she clipped my front wheel, and yeah, I still don't quite know how I survived it, but I'm very grateful that I did. Did a little detour into the off the road into the grass, but yeah, I stayed upright, so really happy about that.
And I know recently you wrote a quite a poignant article that went into Cycling News. How's the reaction been to that? Has that been good? Or?
Wow, I've been super surprised. Yeah, I mean, I actually wrote that article almost 4 months ago, and I've sort of been waiting for the right time or right opportunity to sort of publish it where it could maybe get some attention. And yeah, really happy with the attention that I've got. Even some really great support from the male pros like Mark Cavendish, who retweeted and was very kind in his words. So yeah, I think I've had a very strong feeling about women's cycling and just women equality in general, and how we need to move forward in a man's world. And I think that people appreciate some of the points that I made, and yeah, I'll continue to voice my opinions, and hopefully, the momentum continues and we can see some change.
Yeah, well, best of luck. Sorry.
Women's Tour is one of the tours that is definitely showing, and it's definitely a tour that's setting the benchmark.
So that was Ashley Moolman-Pasio, a favourite certainly for the women's road race. Who's going to win the women's road race, Orla?
Oh, you've put me on the spot. Lizzie Armitstead, I would put my money on if we believe everything that's coming from her camp in terms of that we know that she withdrew from La Course. They say that it wasn't through injury or illness, but that she's wanted to concentrate on Rio. If that is indeed the case, it shows how seriously she's taken it. When she has competed this year, she has shown brilliance, and she's really done credit to the rainbow bands. She wants this so badly, and she's been posting pictures on Instagram and whatnot of trying to make the mountains her friends. So to forego a chance to shine in Paris, which as world champion she will know that was almost her duty to do, it shows how much she's committing herself to Rio. And I think if Lizzie Armitstead puts her mind to something in the form she's in, she's going to be very, very difficult to beat. However, I say that with a caveat of uncertainty around how good the team around her will be. It'll be interesting to see how Emma Pooley plays into that.
Well, Emma Pooley's selection quite controversial. Similarities perhaps with the men's team, where Peter Kennick was picked over Steve Cummings and pulled out because he didn't feel he would be in form. We heard earlier from Danny King, who felt she deserved a place in that team. Emma Pooley's been picked on the strength of her potential in the time trial, but she hasn't shown anything this year to suggest that she will win a medal, so that'll be interesting. Anything else you're looking forward to? I'm looking forward to the women's team pursuit, because at the World Championships, the Americans, and Andy Sparks, their coach, who is also the husband of Sarah Hammer, deserves huge credit for building a fantastic team with the experience with Sarah Hammer and some very young, talented riders. They rode extremely well there. The British team had a bit of a shocker there, but Katie Archibald will be back for Rio, having missed the World Championships, and I think that could be a really good race.
I think that's going to be a brilliant race, and those girls are fascinating, aren't they? Because when they took to the event, and it became a 4-person event rather than 3, every single race they not only won, but they broke the world record time after time after time, to the extent that we did end up taking it for granted, although we knew it was going to have to come to an end. And since that dominance really has waned, then they have been struggling, I guess, to get back on top. They've got a great team dynamic, and they are girls who seem to get on very well together, and that is important in something like the team pursuit, where cohesion and innate understanding of each other is so important. So I think, I'm going to be interested to see what they can produce. They are making the right noises, they're saying the right things, and it would be fantastic if they could pull it out of the bag again on the stage that really matters. But it's going to be hard for them.
And then Laura Trott, of course, in the Omnium, which should be good. We should wrap up there, Orla. So you're off to Rio. You'll come back next month with stories, reports, all the rest of it from Rio.
And hopefully a voice. Who knows?
Fingers crossed for that. Thanks very much. Enjoy Rio.
Thank you very much, Richard. Enjoy from afar.
The news that Lizzie Armitstead has won the right to compete here in Rio is the first we even knew she had a case to answer. UK anti-doping had been wanting to ban the world champion for 3 missed tests in the space of 1 year. However, Armitstead claims the first of those missed tests was actually the fault of UK anti-doping themselves. She said she'd made it clear where she was. She'd filled in the official athlete's whereabouts form, but the anti-doping officers hadn't made enough of an effort to contact her. She was tested the very next day in competition and points to that fact as evidence. She says that she wasn't trying to avoid testing. While she took her case to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, who ruled in her favour, she is now clear to compete at the Rio Olympic Games. The potential significance of this for Team GB is considerable. Armitstead is the world champion. She was the first medalist for Team GB in London 2012. She is one of the first serious prospects here in Rio, and she's going for gold with a very good chance of that. She is now clear to compete. She says she'll try to put all of this to one side and concentrate on the task in hand. No easy feat. She's got to do that on Sunday for the women's road race here in Rio.
So we heard there from Orla Chennaoui on Sky Sports News in Rio last night. We're talking on Tuesday. It was a dramatic news that Lizzie Armitstead is going to Rio to ride the women's road race on Sunday, but is lucky to be doing so because she had 3 missed drugs tests in a 12-month period. She appealed to CAS, the Court of Arbitration for Sport, and had the first missed test overturned. She claimed that the mistake was that of the drug tester who appeared at her hotel and didn't try hard enough to contact her. I think most people feel that she's been quite lucky, and I'm joined now by my regular podcast friends and colleagues, Daniel Friebe. Hello, Daniel.
Hello. Hello, Richard.
And Lionel Birnie. Hello, Lionel.
Hello, chaps.
So we thought the 3 of us would get together. We'll return with our regular podcast next week, and we'll talk about the Olympic road races and things. But we felt that this was a big enough story to get the 3 of us together briefly just to discuss it. And it's a shame that this is our first get together since Tour de France, but there you have it. I mean, what's quite interesting for me, I think we'll talk about the Lizzie Armitstead case, and then more generally the whole issue of the whereabouts system, which she's fallen foul of. But we had the big interview with Lizzie Armitstead earlier this year, and what came across was how independent she is, how much of her own woman she is, and how well organised she appears to be. She coaches herself, she writes her own training plan, she talked about how she did that, and it was all quite impressive. And I think of all the athletes we would imagine might be guilty of these kind of administrative blunders, which is what she's blaming at least one of the missed tests on, I would put her fairly far down the queue. And so I think that's the surprise, that of all the athletes to miss 3 tests in a year, it is Lizzie Armitstead, the world champion. I think that's a surprise, first of all. And it doesn't look good, does it, Lionel?
Well, no, it doesn't look good at all, coming just a few days before the Olympic Games road races, where Lizzie Armitstead is one of the favourites. She's the reigning world champion, of course, and with all of the controversy surrounding the participation of Russian athletes, Zabelinskaya, the Russian rider who won 2 bronze medals in London, is not going to Rio because she failed a drugs test in 2014 for a hormone, and as a result of that historic positive test, she's not going to be competing. I know that's like comparing apples and oranges, but when you have such controversy over an entire nation's participation in the Olympic Games, then to have one of the key women in the women's road race also subject to a degree of controversy and uncertainty and sort of a lack of transparency, it's not a good position to be in with the Games just a few days away.
I mean, we should obviously reference the fact that earlier in this podcast, Orla and I were in Paris, and we were musing over the absence of Lizzie Armitstead, and it was explained that she was missing La Course in Paris because she didn't want to race or risk any kind of crash or incident before Rio, and that wasn't true. Now, we understand the reasons for her not being completely honest about what was going on at the time, and had the had the Daily Mail not reported this story, we might, and probably would never have known about it. I just wonder if, given her, position as world champion, the comments she's made in the past about doping and anti-doping, whether she might have been well served to be completely transparent in this case about what had been going on. A very difficult thing to be, because when it comes to missed tests, people are inevitably suspicious and sceptical.
I think the thing is, Richard, that this isn't something that's just kind of been sprung on Lizzie Armitstead. It's obviously been sprung on the wider world because the news broke overnight. But the system is pretty clear in that if you miss 3 out of competition dope tests, surprise dope tests, within a 12-month period, then you are going to find yourself subject to a suspension. And so when Lizzie Armitstead missed the 3rd of those tests in June, she was subject to a suspension from racing, and that's why she missed La Course and Ride London. And the wider world was led to believe that either she was ill, which is why she pulled out of the Giro Rosa, or she didn't want to risk crashing prior to the Olympic Games. And that's where it all gets really murky for me, because I think in the history of cycling, it's through the 80s and 90s, there's a strong suspicion that problems with dope tests were just sort of massaged away, and sort of, anecdotally, I think we know of, the allegations that riders would miss races, and that would be because they'd been given a suspension on the quiet. I'm talking historically here, rather than necessarily what's going on now. So I think the most uneasy thing about the entire thing is that we had a situation where the world champion's pulling out of a race and having to give a dishonest answer for her absence, or a dishonest reason for her absence.
Daniel, should Lizzie Armitstead be going to...
I'll take it back first and just say that the anti-doping system is based on strict liability, a principle of strict liability, which is something we've spoken about many times before. And if we think about instances where substances have been found in people's urine or blood, and they've argued that those substances have come from nutritional supplements and food, and sometimes the Court of Arbitration for Sport has accepted those excuses, those reasons. Sometimes it hasn't. But really, the strict liability law is the very foundation of anti-doping. And, you can't have a system which is based on people's good faith or what you think is someone's good faith. And, let's entertain for a moment the idea that Lizzie Armitstead cheated. Let's imagine that a cheat decided that they weren't going to take a urine sample, or they weren't going to give a urine sample or a blood sample, and they put their phone on silent and they sent the tester away, and that is why the rule exists, so that people don't do that. So, I would suggest, based on everything we know about Lizzie Armitstead, that people are entitled to think that wasn't the case here. However, again, it's based purely on good faith and what we imagine to be her morals and what she said in interviews and what we imagine to be her stance on anti-doping. But that cannot be the foundation for an anti-doping system, can it, really?
You're absolutely right, Daniel. Sorry. But the other thing to bear in mind is that the Court of Arbitration for Sport has upheld her appeal against that first missed whereabouts test. And so in the strictest case, the highest court of sports arbitration has sided with Lizzie Armitstead's point of view and accepted her reason for that first missed test. And so really the issue is about how this found its way into the public domain. Had the Daily Mail not reported it, we would all be none the wiser. And so this is the really uncomfortable thing, is that once you get a peek through the door into the world of doping and anti-doping, you spot anomalies and situations like this, and it casts a huge shadow and a huge doubt over the entire system. It makes you wonder, it makes the general public wonder, well, what else is going on? How many other riders are on 2 missed tests, or how many other riders have had 3 strikes but have managed to appeal one and have not volunteered to make that information public. We simply don't know. It's likely to be a tiny, negligible number, probably, and yet this whole situation, because it's found its way into the public domain, it's casting a pretty long shadow certainly over the women's road race on Sunday.
And Lionel, we talk about transparency a lot, and transparency really is key, isn't it? Because we're basically, we're going on partial information, and what is important here and what probably dictated why the Court of Arbitration for Sport has decided that Lizzie Armitstead could go to Rio are the minutiae, and her defence is based on the fact that her phone was on silent, and this fairly vague line has been quoted that the tester in question didn't make adequate efforts to contact her. Well, what exactly are adequate efforts to contact her and what are not? Did he phone 10 times? Did he phone 15 times? Is it acceptable that someone's mobile phone is on silent in the hour of the day when they are supposed to be in a certain location for anti-doping purposes? And these are all important details that we don't know yet, and that we'll hopefully find out when the Court of Arbitration for Sport, I believe, will publish a reasoned decision. But at this stage, it's very difficult to make a judgment call on whether there was good faith shown here or not.
And UK anti-doping, reading between the lines of their statements, seem quite mystified by the Court of Arbitration for Sport's decision. They particularly want to know, what were the grounds for upholding Lizzie Armitstead's appeal, in particular about that first missed test. And the question that everybody has is, why did it take her so long to appeal that first missed test? That's something that was missing really from Lizzie Armitstead's statement. It went into quite a lot of detail about the circumstances about why the tester couldn't get in touch with her, the fact that it was a blunder on her part for the second missed test, and the third missed test resulted, she said, from a situation where there was a serious family illness that caused her to be elsewhere. And so there are lots of questions for her still to answer, despite her having released a statement. And she's kind of gone to ground today, which is perhaps understandable, but she's definitely got a lot more questions to answer, and I think there's an opportunity for her here to go the extra yard, as it were, and commit to somehow being even more transparent. Let's know her previous history of missed tests, if there are any. She has to really take the responsibility very seriously of being the world champion, and perhaps after Sunday the Olympic champion. She is, one of the favourites for Sunday's race. I'm not sure entirely how she does this, but I think it's incumbent upon Lizzie Armitstead now to really... I think she's extremely lucky to be going to Rio, and that, as both of you have said, under the rules, she shouldn't be going.
Yeah, and I think just because there's a lot of misconceptions about how this whereabouts scheme works, and a lot of athletes will say, it is quite an onerous thing to have to do. You have to specify a 60-minute period every day between 5 a.m. and 11 p.m. where you have to give your whereabouts. You have to tell the testers exactly where you will be and be available for a surprise anti-doping test, and that information is updated online. There's an app that also works, and the address can be changed up to sort of a minute before the slot that you've nominated. But even so, when athletes are moving around the world, competing, maybe training plans change, maybe race programs and will alter, and personal lives will take people from one place to another at short notice.
It's difficult, isn't it?
It would be interesting. It would be an interesting experiment to go through it yourself and say, right, I'm going to make sure that I'm in a definite place for an hour a day, every single day of my life, while you're part of the registered testing pool. This system was introduced in 2004 in a more sort of rudimentary manner, and then it's been tightened up and made more rigorous over the last 12 years. Of course, been some very famous cases where the system has been abused, and of course abuses of the system, such as Michael Rasmussen, who put down that he was in Mexico when he was actually in Italy to presumably avoid being tested out of competition. Those abuses lead to further tightening up of the system, and today's athletes are to a degree sort of paying the price for the conduct of some of their predecessors. But, the whereabouts system has existed for longer than Lizzie Armitstead has been a professional rider. And so it's something she would have been familiar with every single day of her elite professional career. And so... you miss one test, that's the big question. If you felt that the first test was you'd been hard done by, why not set the ball in motion back then to say, hang on a minute, let's get this one struck off, because that has been upheld. That's the huge question. And when athletes are so rigorous about absolutely every aspect of their entire lives and training, and fastidious about their bikes and equipment, and this is an absolute cornerstone of everything that they do. And it's if this is just a series of unfortunate circumstances that have basically snowballed into one very unfortunate circumstance, and there's a prospect that Lizzie Armitstead result in Rio could be completely overshadowed by questions about this.
I'm sure it would be, and in this year of all year though, of all years for her, the Olympic Games has been such a huge goal that she should have been on red alert after missing one test, never mind two. So it's very, very surprising.
I mean, the other thing, Richard, is that I have sympathy with some of the athletes, with people like Lizzie Armitstead, who, I think it's quite common, actually. We've heard anecdotal evidence of riders being on two strikes, not updating their whereabouts information, and being caught out by this. But it is tricky, and you guys, for example, know how difficult I can be to get hold of at times. So, all my sympathies for that. However, we're not talking about she has not respected her whereabouts in what the information that she's given. It's not that she's not respected it 3 times. It's that she's not respected it 3 times when the testers have been there. So how many times over the course of the year has she not been in the place where she said she was going to be? It might be dozens of times. It might be 100 times, but only on 3 occasions have the testers turned up, and she's not been where she should be. So seen in that light, it's quite a major oversight, isn't it? It's either a very major oversight or it's incredibly bad luck.
It is, and ignoring that first test, because Chris Froome had a missed test once when he was staying in a hotel, and the front desk refused to give the tester his room number, and you can understand some of the issues around that. But to miss another 2 in Olympic year, for all that, there was a family emergency, she says, on one occasion, it does not look good. And she does travel to Rio under a bit of a cloud. I took part in a conference call with her yesterday with a bunch of journalists, and looking back now with hindsight, it was pretty farcical, because I don't know if she knew the story was going to break, but the interviews that were done there were subsequently a complete waste of time, because this is the only story that's following Lizzie Armitstead to Rio. And I remember in London when she won a silver medal, and she made some comments in her press conference afterwards about sexism. Perfectly justifiable, perfectly legitimate comments, and a sort of storm of controversy erupted, none of which showed her in a bad light at all, but she was obviously a lightning rod then for this discussion, and she didn't particularly like being in the spotlight like that, and being this this spokesperson for this issue. So she's going to hate the fact that this is the only story that anyone's going to want to talk to her about, but that is the way it's going to be, and especially if she wins a gold medal. Should we wrap things up there, lads?
Just one last thing, Rich. It was reported today that British Cycling had funded Lizzie Armitstead's appeal to the Court of Arbitration for Sport. But according to British Cycling, that's not actually the case. Although they did seek some legal advice regarding how this case might affect team selection for Rio, and they did share some information with Armitstead's representatives, they didn't pick up the legal bills, and they clarified that a little bit later on today after the initial reports.
We will return next week with our regular podcast. I'll be reporting from the Tour of Utah, and we'll be talking about the Olympic Games. Obviously, the road races will have been and gone. We'll look ahead, perhaps, to the time trials, depending on broadcast date, and the track cycling. We'll get Daniel to preview the full track cycling programme.
Yeah, I want a prediction for each race from Daniel on the track.
Gold, silver, and bronze. So we'll convene again next week, chaps. In the meantime, thanks very much, Lionel.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
You're listening to the Cycling Podcast Féminin, supported by Rowan King Coaching and Rafa.
Orla, going back to Paris a minute, you said that you were you'd substituted some dance routines for the energy balls. What did you mean by that?
Well, because you were asking me, you see, how I managed to build up, how I got so much energy. And that's my new thing, you see. If you don't have anything to hand, do a little bit of a boogie in your hotel room. And I can fully recommend at the minute, Christine and the Queens, Tilted. I was taking my inspiration from the French goddess because we were in Paris. So I was learning that dance routine, you see, in my hotel room, to do it in the Champs-Elysees, and I'm doing it right now, very badly. See, it gives you energy.